So a little inside baseball here. Kumo is the official head researcher of the show, and before I got on the plane to head to South Carolina here, he set me up with a dossier on the entire X business at BMW. Some of the numbers were so unbelievable, I had to confirm them with the folks here once I got off the plane. And the one that really made me take a pause was, since 1999, when they introduced the X5, BMW has sold 5.6 million X's in that time, whether it be 5s, 4s, 3s, 2s, 1s. And let me put that another way. BMW, Freude am Fahren, has sold 5.6 million sport utility vehicles, crossovers, they call them sport activity vehicles, or baby buggies in a 19-year period. And so much so that in 2017, total global production, X's accounted for 32%. This one, the middle model, the X4, it's kind of fancy with a sloping roof in the back, was 200,000 units globally. So if it's that important, perhaps you and I need to drive the second derivation, but of course, let's start with the one that has the most powerful engine. Welcome to somewhere along the border of South Carolina and North Carolina, where it is extremely buggy. But what it isn't extremely muggy. When I stepped off the plane yesterday, I expected it to be complete soup. But very fortunate for us, it's not, which helps with testing some pulling power. So let's put our foot into this thing. Remember, we learned in the tech review that this is not exactly a lightweight, but not exactly fat. At 4,326 pounds, put our foot into it. This is comfort mode and plenty of power. It still has the same kind of sharpness as the M40 that we drove. Remember, that was at Laguna Seca, great track, one of my favorites. But that's the basic mode. Let's try this in Sport. You know what? Sport Plus, because that gives us the controlled misfire, even in a baby buggy, because you always need that. Okay, so yeah, the throttle mapping definitely changes. It's a little bit sharper, but there you get the controlled misfire. See, I think that's the difference between bad parenting and good parenting. You need controlled misfire in a kid's life. Oh, here we are. Welcome to North Carolina. By the way, very good food here. It doesn't matter whether it's North Carolina or South Carolina. Let's put our foot into it, sport mode. Okay, so I'll admit, I am one that is very negative against crossovers. I prefer cars, preferably cars that are not practical, but for a crossover, pulling power in this thing is incredible. Okay, as wonderful as that sounds, let's put the grins and giggles aside of controlled misfire, because there's two very specific things about power delivery here. Number one, the transmission. Now, I know we talked about an 8-speed automatic in that M5 episode, and this is not exactly the same thing, but there are two things that are similar. Obviously, 8 forward gears, and number two, it's a torque converter. But even though it's a torque converter, it has the feel almost as if it's a dual clutch, because the shifts, A, are sharp, whether it's automatic mode or manual mode like I'm doing now. And number two, the system lets you control the shifts, even if it disagrees with you, like I want to downshift 3, downshift to 2. The system normally would say, this is verboten, but in this case it didn't, because it lets you do the shifting, which inherently lets you control the pulling power. And then second, and perhaps I'm biased here because I've owned two BMWs, but something about the power delivery of a BMW inline 6, there's nothing else on the planet like it. And in a car, really a crossover, where power delivery, no matter how sporty they get, you just don't get sharp power delivery. Don't walk away from these things thinking, oh my God, there's really sharp, efficient power delivery. Here you do, and that has everything to do with it being an inline 6 von Deutschland. So in the tech review, I told you about Claude and how some of the parts of that platform have made the transition from a G12.7 series, a G35 series, to this X4. Specifically, that rear suspension. I said it's kind of the same, but the packaging is different. Well, it turns out it's a lot more than just packaging. So it is a multi-link unit, a 5-link unit, kind of like in this X3. But when you consider that this is an SUV, it's wider than this X3, but it's also wider than, say, a G35 series. So what you have to change is not just the packaging for a high center of gravity vehicle, you also have to change the packaging for a wider vehicle, which means you have to change the length of those links, which has an impact on the size of the axle carrier, which has an impact as to where that suspension attaches to the size of this body. Then that all works in conjunction with, okay, there's tuning. And tuning in, say, an X3 to an X4 have everything to do with software. Like all the hardware, with the exception of the length of those links, is all the same. But what's changed is the tuning. Like, for example, you have to have that contact patch. It's all about the contact patch. Well, in an X3, there is some passive steering, basically towing. Most cars have this. It's all with the bushings. However, in the X3, it's designed for understeer, basically safer for people who are not like driving fanatics like you and I. But in an X4, it's designed for more sport, but then you have these longer links, which has an impact on that tuning for understeer. So what they've done is the engineers have changed the tuning, because you have these longer links of the toe-in, now for more neutral handling to take advantage of the longer links. That then works in conjunction with the optional e-diff that's on offer in the M40, the one we're driving. And what that does is, send more torque to the outside wheel. Simple enough. But here's a situation where there are 3 levels of dynamic stability control on offer. There's the full on, and then there's the middle level, and then there's the full off. So you have to change the e-diff, the amount of torque that goes to that outside wheel. So the least amount of torque is when there's full stability control. Then there's like the Goldilocks middle amount, and then the most amount of torque goes over to that outside wheel, because when the stability control is off, the engineers and the system is assuming there's more slip on the inside wheel. Okay, now that we covered all that, let's go and drive it. Disturbing the plane of motion, going downhill around a declining radius turn. And granted, I am in sport mode, and yes, this is a crossover, but it's surprisingly stable. There isn't a lot of pitch, squat, dive, or roll. Like, please don't try this at home, and I really don't think that most like young moms who are going to put their kids in the back of this thing are really going to do this, although they should, because this is how you would make a good citizen. You show them how to drive from when they're in the baby seat back there. But using the stunning roads here of South Carolina, man, oh man, this thing is... You know what? It makes me less mad about crossovers taking over the world. And this is a different kind of crossover, because obviously it looks different, but also remember we talked about 4,326 pounds. What's specific about this is weight distribution. Normally the crossovers, they're front wheel drive and they're like 60-40, so we wouldn't even talk about weight distribution. Here it's practically 50-50. Like, if I'm being pedantic, it's like 50.1 and 49.9 after I spoke with Stefan, who runs all of driving dynamics for this X4 program. Great guy, by the way. And he's a wagon guy, believe it or not. And then he's been spending some time working on this thing on the roads in Germany as well as on the Nürburgring. This is an interesting vehicle to do tuning on the Nürburgring, which kind of works well in places like this. So let's put our foot into it, coming around this wonderful road here. Please don't pay attention to the speed limit sign there. There's a little bit of lean in the front if you push it very, very hard. And again, most people who are going to buy this thing are probably not going to drive it like this. But I am well aware that folks that are watching me now, whether they're car girls or car guys, this would be the choice of crossover, at least the one they would agree with their better half as to put the kids in and still have some fun with it. I am surprised how much fun this thing is to drive. Like, downright shocked. Okay, so about that dissertation I was just giving you about the rear suspension, toe-in, and the length of the links. Well, there are 2 other things about it that are not readily apparent. First and foremost, you may have noticed in this past driving segment that the X4, it rolls less, and this is by design. Stefan, the guy who runs driving dynamics for this thing, and I really feel bad for this guy because he had to spend like weeks driving this thing in the Alps. I mean, tough job, man, really tough job. Anyway, with all the changes I just told you about, he designed in less roll, which makes this feel like it has a shorter wheelbase, almost like a real four-wheel steering system, although this doesn't have four-wheel steering. And then there's another benefit, and this is where I'm going to geek out about design. So if you think about it, you have more metal underneath the vehicle in the form of longer links and a wider rear suspension. You can wrap more sheet metal around said car, especially in the arse end. So it's got, well, there's no better way to put this, it's got like a badonkadonk. There's like a better proportion back there, which, dare I say, it's a baby buggy that looks cool. So we're driving a baby buggy, which means it's sadly that time again for me, the back seat. And as per usual, that is where I, a 6-footer, would sit. So I, a 6-footer in the back seat. There is some room, but not quite as much as, remember that Lexus ES we just drove? That had like oodles of room. This, it's usable, and I think driving around for more than 10 minutes, this would totally work. I think for the Rugrats, this is plenty of room back here. Now, there are some things going on. Number one, there are some fancy details. Like, I just have to point out, the two-tone black and red interior wouldn't be my first choice. Like, I wouldn't like dream it up, but wow, it looks good in here. Especially with this like sort of quilted pattern on the center of the seats. Nice touch. I would love to see some more like contrast stitch. Like you get the contrast red here, but not contrast black here. That would be a nice detail. And then I love me some accent lightings. Nice touch, and they put the X here. But then back to comfort, there was an armrest here, which takes some doing to actually pull out of here. Apparently I'm not doing so well with the armrest today, am I? There we go. Okay, finally got that. There's a cup holder back here, granted small size, not like big gulp size like us Americans like. There is an HVAC system back here. This one is not fitted with the heated seats in the back, but something tells me with these spaces here there could be heated seats. Interesting though, notice there is a power adapter, but it's a SIG plug. It is not the usual USB, and I think if one is trying to court the mommies that are going to buy this thing or the cool dads that are going to buy this thing, you would need USB ports in the back, because at the end of the day, like I actually travel with less SIG plug adapters, and I think most people are kind of into USBs at this point. Hell, I'm shocked most of these cars don't have mini USBs. So I must say Entschuldigung, because throughout 2 episodes I have neglected to share with you the most practical data point about a practical vehicle, and that is storage capacity. With the seats up, 18.5 cubic feet, and with the seats down, 50.5 cubic feet. Now that probably is enough room for 2 Stinger missiles and a set of these, but God knows if I'm driving it, there's no way these things are going to be in here. So let's call it 3 Stinger missiles until we get this thing here in the hangar, and we'll do a full Living With episode after we drive the 4-cylinder turbo. With that, I need to share a bit of a revelation here, because I can't believe I'm about to say this about a crossover, baby buggy, practical vehicle, but I like this thing a lot. I mean, really a lot. And if you've been watching previous episodes, you know that my previous favorite was the Volvo XC60 in this space, and not because it's the best driving vehicle in the space. I would have said it was the Mercedes GLC up until this point, simply because that is a rear-wheel drive vehicle that has all-wheel drive kind of grafted onto it, where the Volvo is front-wheel drive, but with the right tuning and if the right version you get, or put it in sports setting and then add in, it is much prettier and the interior is so much more flash. I said the Volvo XC60 was the one to go with. However, now after driving this, I think I'm taking that back, because this is so much more moving to drive. It's a better experience to drive, and I really had to spend some time reflecting upon this on the flight home, and it finally dawned on me. What BMW engineers did is not update the generation from 1 to 2, They took a crossover, sport utility vehicle, baby buggy, and they squashed it to the point where it has driving dynamics closer to a sporty wagon than a crossover. And that is why I like it. So at this point, I need to turn this around to you and share 2 more data points with you in order to pose a question. The base price of the one we have yet to drive, the 4-cylinder turbo, is like 50 grand, $50,450. And then the one we drove, the base price at least, is $60,450. Now, of course, the one we had all sorts of options, so it's a lot more money. But at the end of the day, you're talking 50 or 60 grand. So let's put this in perspective. That's at least $8,000 more than the fanciest fully gasoline XC60, and still more than the twin-engine plug-in hybrid XC60. So you can kind of see where I'm going with this. If you had to choose, which one would you choose between the X4 M40i or the fully fancy gasoline XC60 or the plug-in twin-engine 2-propulsion system XC60? A lot of X's here. And you know what? For good measure, I will be very generous. You get to choose the GLC 43 as an option, not the 300 and not whatever diesel option is on offer in Europe. And you don't get to choose the Audi because the driving dynamics on that is very different than all the ones I'm talking about here. So which one would you choose? Why would you choose it? And most importantly, what region of the world do you hail from, and do you drive a car like this? And you know, for added measure, what do you do with it? Let me know in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV on Word, MotoManTV on Word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, I think I've been entirely practical with you people with not 1, but 3 episodes of a Lexus ES and then 2 episodes of a baby buggy. Now you can't see it, but there's a 600 horsepower something over there that has 2 doors and is in a ridiculously loud color with yellow seatbelts. So I'm gonna go drive that with Kumo and hopefully regain some of my ridiculousness. So I'll see you next time. Bis später.